Imagine discovering your baby has been swapped for something unnatural, cursed by dark magic. The haunting fight to save her child. Emily faces a terrifying race against time to save her unborn child from a deadly curse. Dark magic, betrayal, and supernatural forces collide in this chilling tale that will leave you questioning reality. If you're ready for a horror story full of suspense and twists, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us till the end. This nightmare is just beginning. Emily stood on the subway, one hand gently resting on her slightly swollen belly. The presence of the life growing inside her brought a mix of comfort and anxiety. The screech of the subway tracks echoed through the car, blending with the city's chaos and the faint smell of sweat that clung to the air. Around her, people were glued to their phones or lost in their music, wrapped in their own worlds. Emily sighed softly. Her body had been acting strangely lately, but she chalked it up to the usual discomforts of pregnancy. Yet, the sharp pains that woke her in the middle of the night and the relentless nightmares that followed had started to gnaw at her nerves. She could feel the dull ache in her lower abdomen, like a needle pricking her insides, sending waves of unease through her. Probably just stress, she muttered to herself, instinctively placing her hand over her belly in a protective gesture. That's when she noticed something strange. An old man sitting across from her was staring, glaring, at her stomach. His faded suit hung loosely off his frail frame, and his gray, unkempt hair stuck to his head like straw. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but it was his cold, piercing gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. His eyes locked onto her belly with a strange intensity, almost as if he could see something no one else could. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She averted her gaze, pretending not to notice, but she could still feel the weight of his stare pressing down on her. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she tried to distract herself, scrolling aimlessly. The subway lights flickered as the train rattled forward, casting eerie shadows in the dimly lit car. Each time the light dimmed, the air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. Emily stole another glance at the old man. Without warning, he spoke, his voice raspy and low. "Girl, the baby inside you. It's not yours anymore." Emily froze. Her body stiffened as if an icy hand had gripped her heart. She forced herself to stay calm, but her pulse raced, and her mind spun. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice trembling, not sure if she had heard him correctly. The old man didn't smile, didn't look away. His gaze remained fixed on her as he repeated, "Your baby? It's been swapped." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. This man must be crazy. She glanced around the subway car, half expecting someone else to be watching, but no one seemed to notice. She wanted to move, to escape, to call for help. She reached for her phone, her fingers shaking, but the old man's next words stopped her cold. "A dead child now grows inside you. Someone used dark magic to switch your healthy baby with theirs." Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. Sure, she'd been feeling off lately, but the doctors said everything was fine. How could anyone swap a baby? "You're talking nonsense," Emily finally managed to stammer, though her voice lacked conviction. The old man leaned forward slightly, his eyes glinting with something sinister. "You let someone touch your belly recently, didn't you? Pregnant woman. She used that moment to swap your child with her dead one." Emily stumbled back, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her mind raced. Jessica, her friend, who had touched her belly just days ago, flashed through her thoughts. "No, couldn't be. You've got 3 days," the old man said, his tone growing darker, more urgent. 3 days to fix this. After that, not even the gods can help you." Before Emily could respond, the subway screeched to a halt. Passengers flooded off the train, but she stood frozen in place. The old man rose, gave her one final look, and disappeared into the crowd as the doors hissed shut. Emily was left standing in the cold, sterile light of the subway, her heart racing, her stomach twisting with dread. The clattering subway and the old man's haunting words played over and over in Emily's mind. By the time she arrived at the hospital, her nerves were shot. His warning echoed like a curse. Your baby has been swapped. A dead child grows inside you. She tried to shake off the irrational fear. It was absurd, wasn't it? But the persistent pain in her abdomen and the nightmares that left her gasping for breath each night were becoming harder to ignore. Emily told herself she just needed confirmation. She needed to hear from a doctor that everything was normal. Sitting in the waiting room, Emily clenched her phone tightly, watching the clock on the wall tick by at a painfully slow pace. The tension in the air was palpable. Every breath felt heavy, as if the walls were closing in around her. Emily Cooper, a nurse called, breaking her from her anxious thoughts. Emily stood and followed the nurse into the exam room. The cold air in the room bit at her skin as she lay down on the examination table. The doctor smeared the gel on her belly, and the ultrasound machine hummed to life. As the wand pressed into her skin, Emily stared at the monitor, desperate to see the flicker of life. The doctor's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes narrowing as he moved the wand across her belly. The screen showed nothing but vague shadows. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. The doctor didn't answer immediately. His gaze focused on the screen. He adjusted the wand again, searching for something, anything. Emily's breath hitched, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "I'm just going to take a closer look," the doctor murmured, his tone unreadable. Each second felt like an eternity. Emily's pulse throbbed in her ears, her eyes glued to the screen, willing something, anything, to appear. But there was nothing. The doctor finally set the wand aside, his face somber. He handed Emily a tissue to wipe off the gel, his voice soft but firm. "Emily, I'm sorry, but there's no heartbeat." For a moment, the world stopped. The air was sucked from her lungs, and all she could hear was the deafening roar of silence. She stared at the doctor, her mind refusing to process his words. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not possible. Everything was fine last week." The doctor sighed, his expression filled with sympathy. "Sometimes these things happen without warning. It's called fetal demise." "I'm so sorry, but there's nothing we can do." Emily's vision blurred. The old man's words rang in her ears like a death knell. "Your baby has been swapped. A dead child grows inside you." She stood up, barely able to speak. I need to think. I need some time." The doctor nodded, handing her a stack of papers and recommendations for next steps. But Emily barely heard him. Her mind was miles away. She couldn't stay in that room any longer. She needed air. As she walked down the sterile hallway, her hands shaking, she overheard two nurses whispering nearby. "Did you hear about that pregnant woman last week?" One nurse said. "She came in for a checkup and they found her baby had died. But she refused to let them take it out. She just left. No one's seen her since." "Yeah, it's happening more often now. Stress, pollution, all of it. Just messing with people's bodies." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was it Jessica? No, that was impossible. This had to be a coincidence. Couldn't be her. But as she pushed open the door and stepped out into the cold, her mind buzzed with fear. Could it be true? Could Jessica have done something to her? Emily's footsteps felt heavy as she made her way home from the hospital. The world around her seemed to continue as normal. Cars honking, people rushing by, oblivious to the storm of fear and confusion brewing inside her. She clutched the hospital report in her hand, the doctor's words still echoing in her mind. There's no heartbeat, but it wasn't just the news that haunted her. It was the old man's prophecy, the bizarre and impossible idea that her baby had been swapped. Jessica's face kept flashing in her mind. They had been friends since high school, close ever since. When Jessica got married and announced her pregnancy, Emily had been genuinely happy for her. But now, a dark thought crept into her mind. Could Jessica have something to do with this? Just a few days ago, they had met for lunch. Jessica had reached over, gently placing her hand on Emily's belly, smiling as she said, "Our kids will grow up together. Maybe they'll even get married someday." At the time, it had seemed sweet, even funny. But now, as Emily replayed the moment in her head, there was something else. A strange glint in Jessica's eyes. Something about the way her hand lingered just a little too long on Emily's belly felt wrong. It was like a shadow had passed between them, unnoticed at the time but now impossible to forget. Was that the moment? Could Jessica have done something? Emily's mind raced as she recalled other small moments. Jessica's increasingly frequent questions about her pregnancy. The odd comment she'd made about motherhood being a competition. It all seemed so innocent before, but now, it felt like a web slowly closing in on her. Emily shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought, but the unease gnawed at her. When she arrived home, the familiar comfort of her surroundings did little to ease her anxiety. The house felt different, colder, darker, as though some unseen presence was lurking in the corners. The silence pressed in on her, heavy and oppressive. She couldn't stop thinking about the old man's words, about the swap he claimed had taken place. It sounded insane, but the more she thought about it, the more unsettled she became. She had to find some kind of proof, something to explain what was happening. Emily began searching through her house, opening drawers, checking closets, pulling out boxes. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Just something, anything, that could make sense of the madness swirling in her head. Her heart pounded as she searched, her mind racing with fear and confusion. The air around her felt heavier with each passing moment, as though the house itself was suffocating her. The ticking of the kitchen clock echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. The shadows cast by the dimming evening light seemed to stretch farther than they should. Then, under the bed, she found it. A small, dust-covered wooden box, hidden so well she would have never noticed it if she hadn't been digging around in a panic. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling as she wiped away the dust and pried open the lid. Inside were two strange dolls, crudely made from cloth and string. One was dressed in black, the other in red. The male doll had a bloated belly, almost as if it were pregnant, while the female doll's stomach was cut open, exposing the cloth beneath. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through Emily's body. Voodoo dolls. The reality of what she was seeing hit her like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some figment of her imagination. Jessica had done something terrible. The dolls were proof. Emily stumbled back, her breathing ragged as she stared at the grotesque figures in the box. Her mind reeled with terror. The old man had been right. Her baby had been stolen, and the dead one inside her was the result of dark magic. Suddenly, her phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. She grabbed it, her heart racing when she saw Jessica's name flash across the screen. For a moment, Emily hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. Then, taking a deep breath, she answered, "Emily, how are you feeling?" Jessica's voice was sweet, concerned, too concerned. I'm fine," Emily lied, trying to keep her voice steady, "just a bit tired. Went to the hospital today." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, everything okay?" Jessica asked, her voice still perfectly calm. They said the baby's gone, that it stopped growing." "Oh no," Jessica gasped. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Emily. That's terrible." Her words were kind, but there was something off, something insincere about her tone. Emily could feel it in her gut. Jessica wasn't surprised, she knew. "Jessica," Emily began, her voice shaking, "you haven't done anything, have you? I mean, anything strange?" "Strange?" Jessica's voice sharpened, her tone taking on a defensive edge. "What are you talking about?" I don't know. Feels like something's wrong. I'm trying to figure it out." Emily's fingers tightened around the phone. There was a long silence. Then, Jessica's voice came through, quieter, colder. "Emily, you should get some rest. This must be hard for you. Don't stress yourself out. We can talk later." The call ended abruptly. Emily stared at the phone, her heart racing. Jessica's calm, almost dismissive response only fueled her suspicions. Something was definitely wrong. Emily looked back at the dolls in the box. She knew now that she was in real danger. Jessica wasn't just her friend. She was a threat, and whatever had been done to her, it had to be undone. She needed answers. She needed help. Emily sat on her couch, her head spinning with everything that had happened. The old man's warning, the voodoo dolls, Jessica's strange behavior. It all pointed to something far darker than she could have ever imagined. But there was one piece of the puzzle she still couldn't fit together. John, her husband. He had always been supportive, kind, and steady. But lately, there had been moments, little things that made her wonder. He had been distant, distracted, and his reaction to the news about the baby's death had been off. He hadn't seemed shocked or devastated, just resigned. The late-night phone calls he never explained, the piles of unopened bills on the kitchen counter. Emily had dismissed it all as temporary stress. He would always assure her, "I'm handling it, Em. Just trust me." But now, as she pieced together the growing financial strain they had been under, a dark realization crept in. John had been hiding more than she knew. Could he know something? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had to confront him, to find out if he was involved in whatever dark forces had stolen her baby. Later that evening, as John came home from work, Emily watched him closely. He greeted her with a tired smile, but there was something in his eyes, something she hadn't noticed before. "Hey, how are you feeling?" he asked, his tone casual. Emily hesitated, then said, "Not great. I went to the hospital today." John paused, his hand frozen in the middle of taking off his coat. "Yeah? What did they say?" "They said, the baby's gone." Her voice cracked as she forced the words out. John sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, Em. I know how much you wanted this." Emily watched him carefully, her eyes narrowing. There was sadness in his voice, but not the kind of sorrow she expected from a father who had just lost his child. There was something else, relief? I don't understand," she said quietly, searching his face for answers. "How could this happen?" John's gaze flickered for a moment, and he looked away. "Sometimes, things just don't work out the way we want them to." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. "John, you wouldn't know anything about this, would you?" He froze. For a split second, a look of panic flashed across his face. He quickly masked it with a tired smile, shaking his head. "Of course not, Emily. What are you talking about?" But Emily wasn't convinced. The dolls, Jessica's behavior, the old man's prophecy. It all pointed to something bigger, and John was hiding something. She didn't press further that night. Instead, she waited until John fell asleep and then quietly took his phone. Scrolling through his messages, she found it, the proof she had been dreading. A conversation with Jessica. It was brief but damning. "Jessica, we'll have to be careful. She's starting to suspect something. John, I know. I just need the money to come through, and then we can move on." Emily's stomach churned with disgust. John had known. He had been working with Jessica all along, helping her with whatever dark ritual had stolen their baby. And it was all for money. Her mind flashed back to the arguments they'd had about the bills piling up. John's late-night phone calls where he whispered and avoided her questions. The weight of it all crashed down on her. John had been lying to her, struggling with the mounting debts and financial pressure they faced. Jessica must have known about their troubles and exploited them, offering John a way out, a way that cost them their child. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she stared at the screen. How could he do this? How could he betray her like this? Her world was falling apart, but she couldn't stop now. She had to get her baby back, and that meant confronting Jessica and John for the truth. As Emily clutches her phone after discovering John's betrayal, her mind is racing. Her hands tremble as she dials the old man's number. When he answers, his voice is grimmer than ever. "There's no time left," he warns. "You must act before it's too late." Emily's breath quickens. The weight of everything, Jessica's betrayal, John's deception, and the dark ritual that had stolen her baby, bears down on her. Every minute that passes brings her closer to losing everything. Suddenly, Emily feels it. A chilling presence fills the room. The shadows in her home seem to move on their own, stretching unnaturally across the walls. The air grows thick with an eerie whisper, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She glances around the room, her heart pounding in her chest. Objects on the shelves begin to shift. Her reflection in the window flickers, not quite her own. Emily feels a cold, unseen force pressing down on her, as if something terrible is about to reveal itself. She knows she's no longer safe. Not here, not anywhere. With the old man's warning echoing in her ears, Emily steels herself for what's to come. She has only one chance to confront Jessica, but even that may not be enough. The real nightmare has only just begun. Thank you for joining us on the first part of Cursed by Dark Magic, the haunting fight to save her child. The nightmare has only just begun for Emily, and the dangers she faces are far from over. Dark magic, betrayal, and chilling forces still loom ahead. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss part 2, where Emily's fight to save her child reaches a terrifying climax. Stay tuned for the haunting conclusion.